Congratulations, you have gently awakened into the heart of Europe. Nestled within the year 1495, a world poised delicately between the echoes of antiquity and the dawning light of profound change. The air that drifts through your humble lodging carries the mingling scents of wood smoke from countless hearths, the distant tang of roasting meats, and the undeniable earthy essence of humanity itself. A tapestry of aromas so rich and intricate, far removed from the clean, sanitized spaces of your own time. You find yourself existing within a vibrant epoch, a glorious tapestry woven with threads of discovery, artistic brilliance, and ambitious exploration. The Renaissance, a magnificent bloom of human creativity, is unfurling across the continent, bringing forth minds as luminous as Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo, whose masterpieces, even now, are being born from stone and pigment, destined to endure through the long passage of centuries, forever whispering tales of beauty and innovation. Yet, beneath this glittering surface of human achievement, a quiet disquiet begins to stir, for you have arrived precisely at the threshold of one of history's most baffling and terrifying disease outbreaks, a mysterious illness that, like a silent creeping shadow, will soon spread its unsettling presence throughout the very fabric of this vast and ancient continent. The hushed bustle of Naples. You now find yourself standing in Naples, a bustling Italian port city, its narrow streets alive with the low hum of daily commerce and the quiet murmur of countless lives. It is February of 1495, and the French army, led by the ambitious King Charles VIII, has recently claimed the city after a prolonged and arduous siege, their victory now echoing through the cobbled alleyways. The jubilant soldiers, a diverse and motley collection from across Europe, fee the stoic Swiss pikemen, the boisterous German lanzknechts, the sharp-eyed Spanish swordsmen, and the ever-ready Italian crossbowmen fey are celebrating their triumph with unbridled revelry. They clink tankards of wine, imported from vineyards that stretch to distant horizons, their laughter mingling with the melodic lilt of local women, all caught in the intoxicating embrace of this fleeting moment of conquest. King Charles's army, a sprawling force of perhaps 50,000 souls, moves like a city upon the land, bringing with it a vibrant retinue of camp followers, diligent cooks preparing simple fare, humble servants attending to every need, and countless others who seek to profit from the soldiers' temporary prosperity. The military victory has slowly unfurled into a week long celebration, a continuous cascade of flowing wine, and a gentle loosening of long-held morals with each passing hour. As you observe the scene, a local woman, her hands flour, dusted from kneading dough, eyes you with a knowing gaze as you pass her bread stall. "Watch yourself around those soldiers," she murmurs, her voice a low caution. Then she pauses to spit discreetly upon the ground for emphasis, before swiftly crossing herself, a quiet plea for protection. The residents of Naples, already weary, are slowly growing to resent the boisterous occupying force, finding their crude manners and disrespectful attitudes increasingly grating on the delicate sensibilities of daily life. For now, the soldiers appear robust, their faces flushed with wine and the warmth of victory. Yet, a silent, sinister seed has begun to germinate among them. For soon some will notice strange, persistent sores, refusing to yield to time or balm, followed by a spreading rash that unfurls across their skin, and a deep aching pain that gnaws at them relentlessly, especially in the quiet hours of the night. For many, this will eventually lead to disfigurement and a slow, agonizing death. What is quietly brewing here in Naples, unseen and unacknowledged, will soon be whispered about as the French disease by the Italians, though other nations, in their desire to deflect blame, will hastily name it after their own enemies or neighbours: the Neapolitan disease, the Spanish disease, or even the Polish disease. This is the silent, insidious genesis of what we, centuries later, will come to know as syphilis, though that specific name will not be coined until the year 1530, by the insightful Italian physician Girolamo Fracastoro. You have arrived at a truly pivotal juncture in the long narrative of medical history, a moment that will ignite centuries of fervent debate among scholars. Did this perplexing affliction journey across the vast ocean with Christopher Columbus and his weary crew in 1493, a silent passenger from the Americas, or had it always, in some hidden form, existed within the ancient soils of Europe? Archaeological whispers, like the faint echoes from Skeleton 1216, unearthed at the Hull Friary site in England, suggest that a similar illness might have indeed been present in Europe long before Columbus's momentous voyage, perhaps even as far back as the 1300s. But something, undeniably, has shifted. Either a new and fearsome strain has subtly emerged, or an old dormant disease has mutated, quietly transforming into something far more virulent, more deadly, and profoundly unsettling. An inn by the harbour, seeking respite from the bustling streets and the lingering scent of conquest. You decide to find a quiet lodging at a modest inn nestled close to the harbour, a place where the rhythmic creak of ship timbers and the distant cry of gulls become a soothing backdrop. Here, weary sailors and astute merchants often gather, their voices a low murmur, exchanging fragmented news and tall tales from distant lands, their experiences weaving a vibrant tapestry of the wider world. The innkeeper, a stout man with a perpetual sheen of honest sweat upon his forehead, and a kindly, if slightly whirled, wary gaze, greets you with a welcoming nod and guides you to a small, unassuming room. It is basic, certainly, by the standards you are accustomed to. A simple straw mattress resting upon a sturdy wooden frame. A small, unadorned table bearing a single, flickering candle, and a utilitarian chamber pot tucked discreetly into a corner. Yet, by the prevailing standards of medieval cleanliness, it is adequately neat, which, admittedly, does not always imply a great deal. Food will be served below when the bell rings, he informs you, his voice a low rumble. We've got fresh fish today, brought in this very morning. The French officers, alas, took most of it, but I saved some, specially for my paying guests. He offers you a quick, conspiratorial wink, a shared understanding in this time of occupation. Later, in the common room downstairs, the air is thick with the inviting scent of cooked fish, stale ale, and the subtle warmth of the communal hearth. You find yourself settled near a group of seasoned sailors, their voices a low murmur, their faces etched with the lines of sun and sea. They claim to have sailed with Columbus himself on his epic voyages to the mysterious New World. And now they regale each other with outlandish tales of their adventures, each story seemingly more incredible than the last. One of them, a weathered man with skin like old leather and the gaps of missing teeth, leans in conspiratorially, lowering his voice as he speaks, a hushed intimacy settling over the small group. There's something not right with some of the men who returned, he confides, his gaze sweeping across their faces. Pedro, who was with us on the first voyage, he's got these sores that won't heal, started on his private parts, you know. He makes a crude but unmistakable gesture, a shadow of discomfort passing over his features. Now they're spreading, and the pain in his bones, it keeps him awake at night, screaming like a demon's got him. The others, their faces grim, nod slowly, a shared understanding of unspoken fears. I've heard of others like that, another adds, his voice a low counterpoint. They say it's because they lay with the native women there. You listen intently, your mind quietly connecting these fragmented whispers to the broader narrative unfolding around you, realizing with a quiet sense of awe that you are hearing firsthand what might be the very earliest European accounts of this strange new disease. Whether it truly journeyed across the vast ocean from the Americas, or if it had quietly resided in Europe all along, the connection to Columbus's momentous voyages will, nonetheless, become inextricably woven into the fabric of popular imagination, firmly established as a common, unsettling truth. The unfolding shadow as the weeks slowly unfurl like ancient parchment. You begin to perceive subtle, unsettling shifts within the city's vibrant pulse. The once boisterous laughter of the French troops seems to carry a new discordant note, and hushed whispers about a strange affliction begin to circulate among the narrow alleyways and crowded marketplaces. Soldiers, once seemingly robust, now show disquieting signs. Painful sores appear, initially on their most private parts. Then, like an insidious bloom, they spread across their bodies, accompanied by terrible fevers that burn beneath their skin and persistent aches that gnaw at their very bones, particularly in the quiet, vulnerable hours of the night. The local doctors, steeped in ancient texts and long-held traditions, find themselves utterly baffled, their customary remedies proving impotent against this new and perplexing malady. By the gentle warmth of July in 1495, the delicate balance of political power has shifted once more. A formidable alliance of Italian princes, skillfully led by Ludovico Sforza, has managed to decisively defeat Charles VIII's forces at the Battle of Fornovo. A quiet victory that forces the French king and his diminished army into a strategic retreat. As the French army disperses, its soldiers, many now unwitting carriers of the mysterious disease, begin their long, arduous journeys homeward, scattering across the vast breadth of Europe, unknowingly becoming the very vectors of a continent. Wide epidemic, a silent, relentless spread, carried on the weary feet of returning warriors. A journey north. Whispers of God's judgment, you decide to leave the shadowed city of Naples, seeking the promise of renewal and artistic splendor in the north, setting your sights on Rome, a city where whispers of great works of art are continually being breathed into existence. The journey northward, however, proves to be arduous, a testament to the challenges of medieval travel, demanding either the patient rhythm of walking or the steady gait of a horse or donkey along poorly maintained roads, always with a vigilant eye for the lurking threat of bandits. For safety and companionship, you join a merchant caravan, its slow progress a comforting anchor in the vast landscape. Nights are spent either beneath the vast star-strewn canopy of the heavens, the chill air a crisp embrace, or within the humble confines of roadside inns, their quality varying wildly from one to the next. As you travel, carried forward by the patient rhythm of the caravan, you hear more and more fragmented stories of the strange disease, its tendrils now reaching beyond Naples, seeming to quietly follow in the wake of returning soldiers. Upon your arrival in Rome, the eternal city, you find it cloaked not in its usual vibrant hum, but in a palpable state of anxiety. Pope Alexander VI, the controversial Borgia Pope, has already issued solemn warnings about this insidious new disease, which, even now, is quietly affecting members of his own esteemed court. In the hushed month of August 1495, the Holy Roman Emperor Maximilian makes a powerful proclamation declaring that nothing like this disease has been seen before, and, with an air of solemn pronouncement, declares it a divine punishment from God for widespread blasphemy. The religious authorities, quick to interpret the unfolding calamity, frame the outbreak in stark moral terms, seeing it as undeniable divine retribution for sinful behavior, particularly for sexual impropriety, a judgment unfolding upon the very bodies of the afflicted. Yearly measures, ancient remedies, you bear witness to the early tentative attempts at public health measures, a quiet struggle against the unseen foe. Towns, with a newfound urgency, begin to isolate those who display the telltale symptoms, sometimes in dedicated hospices, places set apart for the sick and the dying, a stark reminder of the disease's growing presence. Yet medieval medicine, for all its long-held traditions, offers few truly effective treatments against this novel affliction. Physicians steeped in the venerable Galenic tradition cling to the ancient theory of the four humours: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile, believing that disease stems from an imbalance within these fundamental bodily fluids. Their remedies, therefore, are designed to restore this delicate balance through practices such as bloodletting, the slow release of the body's vital fluid, or purging, a forceful cleansing of the internal system, and sweating therapies designed to induce a profuse expulsion of impurities. For this perplexing new disease, a variety of desperate remedies are attempted. Some physicians, with an air of cautious hope, recommend mercury treatments, applied as thick ointments rubbed into the skin or taken internally, unaware that the very mercury intended to heal would often poison and claim the lives of their patients long before the disease itself had run its course. Others advocate for guaiacum, a resin extracted from a holy wood tree of the New World, believing, with a fervent hope, that God provides cures in close proximity to the source of diseases. The wealthy, with their ample purses, seek out these expensive and often dangerous treatments, while the poor, with no such recourse, suffer without relief, their bodies bearing the full unmitigated burden of the illness. In the bustling markets and the quiet public squares, you observe with a growing sense of unease how quickly fear and profound stigma take root. Those with visible symptoms, their bodies marked by the cruel ravages of the disease, are shunned, avoided like pariahs. People whisper in hushed tones that it is a disease of the immoral, a blight upon the sexually deviant, those who have, in their perceived transgressions, sinned against God himself. Yet you cannot help but notice, with a quiet sense of irony, that the disease, in its indiscriminate spread, affects people from every walk of life, from the common prostitute, often cast aside by society, to the esteemed nobleman, from the hardy soldier to the devout priest. A humbling reminder of humanity's shared vulnerability. Florence's changing canvas by the quiet arrival of winter. Your journey has gently brought you to Florence, the very jewel of the Renaissance, its artistic brilliance radiating outward like a warm, comforting light. Even here, however, the subtle shadow of the disease has fallen, casting a quiet pall over the city's vibrant spirit. You hear murmurs that the brilliant young painter, Botticelli, whose canvases once bloomed with joyful, sensual beauty, has now turned deeply religious, his artistic vision profoundly influenced by the fiery preacher Savonarola. Savonarola, with his impassioned sermons, claims that this pervasive epidemic is God's undeniable punishment for Florence's perceived sinful ways. The radiant, almost pagan beauty of Botticelli's earlier masterpieces, like The Birth of Venus, is now subtly giving way to more sombre, introspective religious themes, his brushstrokes reflecting the spiritual turmoil of the times. In Florence, through a stroke of quiet fortune, you manage to find work as a quiet assistant to a physician, Dr. Lorenzo Benivieni. He is, you quickly discern, an unusual figure among the doctors of his era, for he performs autopsies, carefully dissecting the silent bodies of the deceased to peer into the intricate inner workings of the human form, and to observe first-hand the subtle, devastating effects of disease upon its fragile tissues. This meticulous approach places him, quietly but firmly, at the forefront of the emerging scientific method, a nascent curiosity that seeks truth through direct observation. Working by his side, you are granted a unique and intimate perspective on how medical knowledge, once rigidly confined by ancient texts, is now slowly, painstakingly, beginning to evolve in response to the pressing, undeniable realities of this challenging period. This new disease, Dr. Benivieni tells you, his voice a low, weary murmur, as you help him prepare his instruments, the metallic clink of steel against glass a quiet accompaniment. It is unlike anything described in the ancient medical texts. Hippocrates never wrote of it, nor Galen either. It is truly new to our world, or it has changed its very nature. He sighs, a deep, heavy sound, the weight of their collective ignorance pressing upon him, and our treatments, alas, seem to offer so little relief. The mercury itself causes terrible suffering, excessive salivation, the loss of teeth, uncontrollable tremors. Sometimes I wonder if we are doing more harm than good. You assist him, your hands steady, as he carefully examines patients afflicted with the disease. The progression of the malady is terrible to witness, a silent, relentless unfolding of suffering. In the earliest stage, a painless sore, often small and easily overlooked, appears usually upon the genitals. It heals on its own, a deceptive reprieve, offering a false, fleeting hope of recovery. Then, weeks later, a rash emerges, often covering the entire body, accompanied by a debilitating fever, profound fatigue, and a deep, pervasive ache in the bones. For some, the disease appears to recede after this, going dormant, a quiet, unseen presence for years. But for many, especially in these early, terrifying years of the epidemic, it progresses relentlessly, moving into a third and final stage, bringing with it large, disfiguring sores, a quiet destruction of the heart, the brain, and the very bones, and eventually the slow, inescapable embrace of death. The disease seems to have a pattern, Dr. Benivieni observes, his brow furrowed in concentration. 3 stages with periods of apparent recovery between them. It is most deceptive. Through your quiet work with the doctor, you begin to grasp the profound social dimensions of this unfolding epidemic. The wealthy, with their means, seek treatment in the hushed privacy of their grand homes, paying handsomely for discretion, their suffering shielded from public view. The poor, however, suffer openly, often banished to the very outskirts of towns, their visible afflictions a stark testament to their vulnerability. Religious authorities, with a fervent intensity, preach moral purity as a preventative measure, while city governments, in their limited capacity, struggle to contain the relentless spread. As the year 1496 slowly arrives, carried on the gentle breezes of time, you hear unsettling news that the disease has now reached far beyond Italy's borders, its silent tendrils extending into the distant lands of Germany, France, Switzerland, and Holland. It travels along the ancient trade routes, following the well-worn paths of diligent merchants, weary soldiers, and intrepid sailors. No corner of Europe, it seems, is truly safe from its silent, relentless reach. In the bustling markets of Florence, you quietly overhear conversations about the disease, a constant murmur of fear and speculation. Everyone, it seems, has a theory about its mysterious origins and its perplexing nature. It came from the New World, insists a spice merchant, his voice hushed with certainty. Columbus's men brought it back with them. Nonsense, counters a wool trader, his voice a low rumble. It's a corruption of leprosy, made more virulent by the alignment of the planets. It's the Jews, whispers another, looking around furtively, his eyes darting. They brought it when they were expelled from Spain. You recognize, with a quiet sense of disquiet, how swiftly fear can breed superstition, and how easily it gives rise to the insidious practice of scapegoating. The human tendency to blame others, fey foreigners, enemies, marginalized groups, fey is, you realize, as infectious and pervasive as the disease itself. Venice, canals, and cautious adaptations. The year 1497 brings unsettling news, carried on the winds of trade, that the epidemic has now reached the distant shores of Britain and Scotland. By this time, physicians across Europe, with a quiet determination, are diligently documenting the disease with increasing accuracy, their detailed observations slowly building a clearer picture of its relentless progression. In 1498, Joseph G.R. Feijenpeck, a German scholar, publishes one of the very first detailed descriptions, his words a sombre testament to the affliction's terror, writing that the disease is so cruel, so distressing, so appalling that, until now, nothing so horrifying, nothing more terrible or disgusting has ever been known on this earth. Working alongside Dr. Benivieni has granted you invaluable insights into the quiet, painstaking process of how medical knowledge slowly evolves in response to unforeseen challenges. This epidemic, in its profound novelty, is gently forcing physicians to question long, held ancient authorities and to instead place their trust in the quiet, undeniable truth of their own meticulous observations. You are in these moments witnessing the early, almost imperceptible stirrings of what will eventually blossom into the magnificent scientific revolution. By 1499, the disease has become an entrenched presence, endemic across the entire continent of Europe. Reports suggest it has now quietly reached the distant lands of Scandinavia, Hungary, Greece, Poland, and Russia. European voyages, ever expanding the known world, have inadvertently carried its insidious presence as far as Calcutta in India. It seems no place, however remote, remains untouched by its quiet, relentless reach. During your time in Renaissance Europe, you have quietly observed how distinctly the disease affects various communities. In bustling port cities like Naples and Venice, where sailors and prostitutes mingle freely, the spread is rapid, a swift current through crowded populations. In isolated rural villages, however, it might arrive as a quiet ripple, carried on the tired steps of a returning soldier or a travelling merchant, and then slowly, inexorably, work its way through families and neighbours. A more intimate, contained tragedy, the quiet fear of the disease, you notice subtly alters social behaviours. There is a newfound suspicion of strangers, a quiet reluctance to offer the generous hospitality once freely extended to travellers. Sexual mores, at least publicly, tighten, a cautious pulling back from intimacy. Yet, human nature, in its enduring complexity, remains constant. People still quietly seek pleasure and connection, even when they carry the knowledge of the inherent risks, a testament to the persistent human need for warmth and companionship. In the gentle summer of 1500, 5 years after the first major outbreak whispered through Naples, you find yourself in Venice, that magnificent city of canals and commerce, its intricate waterways a shimmering mirror of the sky. The Republic of Venice, ever pragmatic and deeply experienced in matters of trade and public health, has long since instituted some of Europe's most advanced public health measures. The Venetian Senate, with foresight, appointed health magistrates, whose diligent eyes inspect arriving ships, impose quarantines when necessary, and carefully regulate prostitution, all in a quiet, methodical attempt to control the relentless spread of disease. Venice, beauty and burden as you stand on the iconic Rialto Bridge, watching the graceful gondolas glide silently beneath you, their movements a gentle dance upon the water. You reflect on all that you have quietly witnessed, a continent subtly transformed, not solely by the disease itself, but by the profound and multifaceted ways in which humanity has responded to its unsettling presence. You have seen how this insidious epidemic has softly influenced the very soul of art, the comforting rituals of religion, the evolving practices of medicine, and the intricate web of social structures. You have observed, with a quiet sense of both sorrow and hope, both the darkest aspects of human nature, the paralyzing fear, the harsh blame, the cruel stigmatization, and the luminous best, the quiet courage of healers, the comforting solidarity of communities, and the enduring resilience of the human spirit. As night gently descends upon the tranquil lagoon, the lamplighters move with a quiet grace through the city's labyrinthine passages, their flickering flames bringing forth small, comforting points of brightness into the gathering darkness. This image strikes you as a profoundly apt metaphor for the human response to any calamity. For, in the face of the unknown, there is always the quiet determination to create light, to find understanding, to forge gently ahead, even in the most frightening and uncertain of circumstances. And so, you settle in for the night in your rented room, its window overlooking a small, sleepy canal, listening to the gentle, rhythmic lapping of water against ancient stone, your thoughts quietly pondering what the coming years will bring, as Europe continues its quiet grapple with this mysterious and forgotten disease, blissfully unaware that it will remain a silent scourge for centuries to come, subtly shaping history in ways both profound and imperceptible. The first light of morning filters softly, through the shutters of your Venetian room, casting delicate, dancing patterns of water reflections upon your ceiling, a quiet ballet of light and shadow. You have lingered for several peaceful months in this magnificent merchant republic, observing with quiet fascination how one of Europe's most sophisticated cities quietly responds to the unrelenting epidemic. Venice, you have come to understand, possesses centuries of accumulated experience in dealing with infectious diseases, especially the devastating plague. The city, with its characteristic foresight, established its first permanent health magistracy, the Magistrato alla Sanit Fe, as far back as 1486, barely a decade before this new, perplexing disease first emerged. The Venetian approach, you discover, is impressively systematic, a testament to their pragmatic spirit. Ships arriving at the bustling port must display a clean bill of health, a reassuring symbol of safety, or else remain isolated at anchor for a full 40 days. A practice you realize known as quarantina, from which our modern word quarantine gently derives. The city also thoughtfully maintains a lazaretto, an isolation hospital situated on a separate tranquil island, where the infected can be treated and cared for away from the general population. It is undoubtedly a harsh system, but in its methodical efficiency, it is remarkably effective. Yet even Venice's advanced public health measures, for all their meticulous planning, cannot entirely contain the insidious French disease, as many still refer to it. The city's famous courtesans, often educated, articulate women moving in the most elite social circles, have been particularly affected, both by the disease itself and by the new regulations quietly attempting to control its spread. You have become quietly acquainted with Veronica Franco, a young courtesan who is also remarkably a published poet. Unlike common prostitutes who work the bustling street corners or the raucous brothels, courtesans like Veronica entertain wealthy merchants and noblemen in elegant apartments, providing not only physical companionship, but also intellectual conversation and artistic performances, their minds as captivating as their beauty. The Senate has imposed new restrictions, Veronica tells you, her voice a soft sigh, as you both sip wine on her balcony overlooking the shimmering Grand Canal, its waters a silent witness to countless stories. We must now register with the health office and submit to examinations. Those found with the disease are sent to the lazaretto or expelled from the city. She sighs again, a quiet exhalation, and gently sets down her glass. Many of my sisters in the profession have disappeared, faded, isolated, or fled to other cities with less supervision. Veronica, you observe, is fortunate to count several powerful senators among her patrons, their influence protecting her, for now, from the worst of these harsh measures. But she knows with a quiet certainty that her position remains precarious. The disease has changed everything, she says, her gaze distant. Even when we appear healthy, we are viewed with greater suspicion. Some courtesans now provide only conversation and entertainment, refusing physical intimacy entirely. The very social fabric of Venice, you notice, is quietly shifting in response to the epidemic, just as it is in subtle ways throughout the rest of Europe. Public bathhouses, once popular social venues, are slowly closing, now associated with the quiet fear of disease transmission. Kissing as a form of greeting, once commonly exchanged among men of equal status in many European regions, is gradually falling out of favour. Even the shared communion cup in churches, a sacred symbol of community, is increasingly viewed with suspicion, a quiet unease settling over the devout. Your time in Venice has shown you how a relatively well-organised society responds to epidemic disease, with a blend of ancient wisdom and cautious adaptation. But you are curious, a quiet longing to understand conditions elsewhere. So, as autumn gently approaches, painting the Venetian landscape in hues of gold and rust, you decide to journey northward, crossing the majestic Alps into the German territories of the Holy Roman Empire, drawn by the quiet pull of new discoveries. Through the Alpine chill the journey, as you anticipated, proves to be arduous, a testament to the raw beauty and challenging terrain of the Alps. You join a merchant caravan, its rhythmic pace, a comforting companion, as it slowly makes its way towards the great trading city of Augsburg, carefully navigating mountain passes while the weather still permits before the deep snows descend. The Alpine crossing itself is breathtaking. A landscape of towering, majestic peaks, verdant valleys bathed in soft sunlight, and clear, pristine mountain streams that tumble playfully over ancient rocks. Yet, it is also undeniably dangerous. The narrow paths at times cling precariously to sheer mountainsides, sometimes barely wide enough for the patient pack horses, their breath steaming in the crisp air. At night, you find sleep in rustic mountain hostels, their thick walls offering a simple refuge, or when no shelter is available, beneath the vast star-strewn expanse of the heavens, the cold mountain air a quiet lullaby. Your fellow travellers are a diverse and fascinating group, their stories weaving a rich tapestry of human experience. There are Italian merchants, their faces etched with the sun and wind, carefully transporting precious silks and exotic spices to the eager northern markets. German craftsmen, their hands calloused and strong, return home after quiet years of study in the renowned Italian workshops. Humble pilgrims, their hearts filled with faith, make their way back from the sacred city of Rome, their steps weary but determined, and a handful of bright-eyed students, their minds alive with curiosity, travel between the great universities, seeking knowledge and new perspectives. Around the flickering warmth of the campfire each night, as the embers glowed softly against the deepening darkness, conversation inevitably gently turns to the pervasive epidemic, a silent, unsettling presence sweeping across Europe. In Milan, they're saying it's a punishment for the French invasion, murmurs a silk merchant from Florence, his voice a low, thoughtful hum. God's judgment on Charles and his armies. Then why are the rest of us suffering? Counters a German silversmith from Nuremberg, his voice a quiet challenge. Even children are showing signs of the disease. What sin could they have committed? A student from the University of Padua, who has spent his days quietly studying medicine, offers a different perspective, his voice measured and calm. My professors say it's a corruption of the humours, caused by an unfavourable alignment of the planets, particularly Saturn. They're debating whether it's a new disease entirely, or a more virulent form of leprosy or elephantiasis. You listen intently to these varied theories, your mind quietly reflecting on how humans, in their struggle to comprehend calamity, instinctively grasp for explanations that neatly fit their existing understanding of the world. The devout, in their piety, perceive divine punishment. The educated, in their earnestness, turn to classical medical theories and the subtle influences of astrology. The xenophobic, in their fear, swiftly blame foreigners or marginalized groups. Few, you realize, at this juncture in history, possess the nuanced tools or the broader perspective to truly understand the complex, unseen nature of infectious disease. Augsburg's prosperous shadow after nearly 2 weeks of steady travel. Your caravan slowly descends from the quiet grandeur of the mountains, easing into the rolling, gentle countryside of southern Germany. The landscape unfurls before you, a serene patchwork of dark forests, fertile fields and small picturesque villages, their clustered dwellings, nestled snugly around the slender spires of parish churches, reaching like silent prayers toward the sky. Autumn, with its gentle transformative touch, has painted the forests in brilliant oranges and deep golds, a vibrant contrast to the more subtle, muted palette of the Italian landscape you have left behind. You reach Augsburg as the first delicate snow flurries begin to announce winter's quiet approach. This wealthy imperial free city, with its wide streets and substantial stone buildings, speaks of deep prosperity and meticulous order, a vibrant centre of banking and commerce, home to powerful merchant families like the Fuggers and Welsers, whose vast fortunes quietly finance kings and emperors across the continent. Yet, even here, the subtle shadow of the epidemic quietly looms. Outside the city gates, you pass a newly established hospice. Its simple structure, a sombre testament to those suffering from the French disease. The afflicted sit or lie in the weak, pale autumn sunshine, their faces and bodies marked by the characteristic, unsettling sores. Some, with quiet desperation, call out for alms as you pass, their voices faint in the crisp air. Within the welcoming city, you find quiet lodging at an inn that caters specifically to discerning merchants and weary travellers. The innkeeper, Herr Müller, is a voluble man, his eyes bright with curiosity, eager to share the local news and the latest whispers of gossip. As he shows you to your room, considerably more comfortable than most of your recent accommodations, boasting a soft feather bed and a small, inviting hearth, he quietly explains the city's meticulous response to the epidemic. The city council has banned those with the disease from public bathhouses and barber shops, he tells you, his voice a low, confidential murmur. The Guild of Surgeons has been tasked with examining suspected cases. Those found infected must wear a special marking on their clothes and stay out of taverns and markets. Herr Müller lowers his voice conspiratorially, his gaze holding yours. Even Jacob Fugger's nephew was sent away to their country estate when he showed signs of the disease. Money, alas, cannot protect you from God's judgment. Jacob Fugger, known across Europe as the Rich, is perhaps the wealthiest man on the continent, a banker and merchant whose financial empire stretches across countless lands. That even his family has been touched by the epidemic quietly underscores its indiscriminate nature. A silent reminder that wealth offers no true shield against the vulnerabilities of the human body. During your stay in Augsburg, you learn more about how the epidemic is subtly affecting different segments of society. The patrician families, like the Fuggers, reside in large, imposing stone houses, complete with private wells and privy chambers, allowing them to maintain a level of hygiene far superior to that of commoners. When illness strikes, they can retreat to their secluded country estates, far from urban contagion, and they have unfettered access to the most skilled physicians and the most expensive treatments. However ineffective these remedies might ultimately prove to be, guildmasters, the skilled craftsmen who form the very backbone of the city's robust economy, live more modestly, yet still enjoy considerable comforts. Their workshops and homes are often combined within the same building, with family members and apprentices living and working together in close proximity. This very closeness, however, means that when one falls ill, others often follow, the disease quietly spreading through the intimate spaces of shared life. Journeymen and labourers inhabit rented rooms or simple dwellings in the less desirable parts of the city. They rely on public wells for their water and public bathhouses for bathing, both potential vectors for the quiet spread of disease. When sick, they might receive rudimentary charity care from religious institutions, but often, with no other means of support, they must continue working for as long as their bodies physically allow. The poorest fey beggars, day labourers, and the growing population of displaced rural people seeking opportunity in the cities suffer most acutely, living in overcrowded conditions with meagre nutrition and poor sanitation. They are especially vulnerable to all diseases, including this new and terrifying epidemic. For the wealthy, physicians prescribe mercury treatments administered as ointments, in small, bitter pills, or through fumigation therapy, where the patient is exposed to a noxious mercury vapour. These treatments often cause profuse salivation, which, in the misguided medical understanding of the time, is seen as the body actively expelling the disease. What the doctors, in their earnest but limited knowledge, do not yet realise is that these very symptoms, along with the tremors, gum disease, and neurological problems that many patients develop, are, in fact, the undeniable signs of mercury poisoning itself. The cure is often worse than the disease, comments Dr. Adalbert Heim, a city physician you meet through the innkeeper's quiet connections. His voice is weary but thoughtful. I've seen patients lose their teeth, their hair, their very minds from these mercury treatments. Yet we have little else to offer, except palliative care. Dr. Heim is unusual among his colleagues for his quiet skepticism about traditional treatments. Most physicians still adhere strictly to Galenic medicine, which has changed little since ancient times. They believe illness results from an imbalance in the four bodily humours: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile, and treat accordingly with bloodletting, purging, and substances classified as hot, cold, wet, or dry to counteract the perceived imbalance. The ancients never described this disease, Dr. Heim tells you, his voice a low murmur, as he shows you his modest medical library, its books smelling faintly of dust and old paper. That's what makes it so confounding. We have no guidance from Hippocrates or Galen. We must observe and learn for ourselves. This empirical approach, learning through meticulous observation rather than relying solely on ancient authorities, represents the leading edge of medical thinking in this period. It will, in time, blossom into the grand scientific revolution. But for now, it remains a quiet minority view. As winter deepens its embrace, you witness how the gentle rhythm of life in northern Europe adapts to the harsh season. The days grow short, with darkness falling by mid-afternoon, and the streets gradually empty as people retreat indoors, seeking the comforting warmth of their homes. Families gather around hearths, burning precious fuel to keep warm against the biting cold. The fortunate have stores of food to last until spring's gentle return: salted meat, dried fish, sturdy root vegetables, and preserved fruits. The poor, however, subsist on dark bread and whatever meagre fare they can afford at the increasingly expensive winter markets. Despite the biting cold, life continues its quiet, persistent hum. The Christmas season brings forth vibrant processions and engaging mystery plays depicting sacred biblical stories. Guilds compete with a quiet fervour to present the most impressive pageants. For a time, the festivities provide a welcome distraction from the epidemic's persistent shadow. But as January's deep freeze grips the city, you notice how the disease seems to recede somewhat. Fewer new cases appear, and some victims experience a temporary improvement. Dr. Heim offers an interesting theory about this, his voice thoughtful. It seems the disease, like many fevers, waxes and wanes with the seasons, he explains. Perhaps the cold inhibits its spread or strength, or perhaps when people gather less often in public, there are fewer opportunities for contagion. His insight is remarkable for the time, an early intuitive understanding of what we now know as disease seasonality and the crucial role of social contact in transmission. But without a framework for understanding germs or infection, such observations remain isolated insights rather than building blocks of a comprehensive theory. During your winter in Augsburg, you become acquainted with different social classes and their varied experiences of the epidemic. The patrician families, like the Fuggers, live in large stone houses with private wells and privy chambers, allowing them to maintain better hygiene than commoners. When illness strikes, they can retreat to country estates, far away from urban contagion. They have access to physicians and expensive treatments, however ineffective these might be. Guild masters, the skilled craftsmen who form the backbone of the city's economy, live more modestly, but still enjoy considerable comforts. Their workshops and homes are often combined in the same building, with family members and apprentices living and working together. This proximity means that when one falls ill, others often follow journeymen, and labourers inhabit rented rooms or simple dwellings in less desirable parts of the city. They rely on public wells for water and public bath houses for bathing, both potential vectors for disease. When sick, they might receive charity care from religious institutions, but often must continue working as long as physically possible, having no other means of support. The poorest fey beggars, day labourers, and the growing population of displaced rural people seeking opportunity in cities suffer most acutely, living in overcrowded conditions with poor nutrition and sanitation. They are especially vulnerable to all diseases, including the new epidemic. Spring's gentle arrival. Heidelberg's intellect by the gentle arrival of spring in 1501. You have spent nearly a year in Augsburg, quietly observing its quiet response to the continuing epidemic. The initial panic, you notice, has slowly subsided into a grim acceptance as the disease transitions from a terrifying epidemic to an entrenched endemic presence, a persistent feature of daily life rather than a novel crisis. People, in their quiet resilience, adapt, slowly developing new social customs and public health measures to minimize risk, all while continuing their necessary activities. As the snow gently melts and travel becomes easier, you decide to journey onward to the university town of Heidelberg, where scholars, with quiet diligence, are documenting the disease with increasing precision. You join a merchant convoy, its slow, steady progress tracing the river routes through the very heart of the German-speaking lands. The countryside you pass through bears the subtle marks of both prosperity and hardship. Tended fields quietly surround substantial villages, their homes nestled together. But you also glimpse abandoned farmsteads, their structures slowly reclaimed by nature, and uncultivated land lying fallow and forgotten. The previous decades have brought increasing social tensions. The quiet murmur of peasant revolts, the persistent strain of religious dissent, the subtle pressure of economic shifts brought about by changing trade patterns. The epidemic is but one of many challenges quietly facing the common people of Europe. In the small villages where your convoy pauses for the night, you observe how rural communities are quietly affected by the disease. The spread is slower, more contained than in the crowded, bustling cities, but when it arrives, it often moves intimately through family groups. You hear hushed stories of entire households afflicted, with no one well enough to tend to the essential crops or animals. The rural understanding of the disease, you notice, differs somewhat from the urban perspectives. Village healers, often wise women with a deep inherited knowledge of traditional herbal remedies, offer treatments based on local plants. Guaiacum wood, when available, is sometimes used, but more often they rely on native herbs like sassafras, sarsaparilla and burdock, believed to purify the blood. Some of these, you quietly surmise, may actually possess mild anti-inflammatory or immune supporting properties, providing modest relief, even as their theoretical basis remains profoundly misunderstood. Religious responses are particularly strong and deeply felt in these rural areas. Solemn processions, special masses, and quiet pilgrimages to local shrines seek divine intervention against the relentless epidemic. Some villages revive older, pre-Christian practices alongside Christian observances, hanging protective herbs over doorways, burying symbolic objects at field boundaries, or observing specific taboos believed to ward off illness. As your journey continues, you pass through increasingly prosperous lands along the majestic Rhine River. Vineyards climb the sun-drenched hillsides, their vines promising the famous Rhine wines exported throughout Europe. Ancient castles perch on strategic heights, silent guardians of the landscape, home to the proud nobility who control local territories. River traffic is constant, a gentle hum of commerce, with barges laden with goods moving steadily between major trading centres. At one riverside inn, you meet a group of students returning to Heidelberg after the quiet winter break. They are eager to share the latest medical discussions from the university, where physicians with quiet intensity are carefully documenting the progression and symptoms of the perplexing disease. Professor Theodoricus has identified distinct stages, explains a serious young man named Heinrich, his voice earnest. The primary stage with a single sore, usually on the private parts, the secondary with a widespread rash and fever. And now he's describing a tertiary stage that may appear years later, with Gummer's fey large rubbery swellings, fey and afflictions of the brain and heart. Another student adds, they're debating whether it's truly new or if it's related to other diseases. Some say it's a more virulent form of leprosy, others that it's an entirely novel contagion brought from the islands Columbus discovered. The students, you observe, are brimming with theoretical knowledge, but possess little practical experience in gently treating the afflicted. Still, their systematic approach to understanding the disease represents an important shift in medical thinking, a quiet move toward careful observation and classification that will eventually lead to more effective treatments. You reach Heidelberg as spring blooms across the Neckar Valley. The town is dominated by its ancient university and the imposing castle of the Electors Palatine, who rule this territory. Situated at the junction of major trade routes, it's a place where ideas and goods flow freely, making it both intellectually vibrant and, sadly, vulnerable to the quiet spread of disease. Heidelberg's Quiet Inquiry in Heidelberg. You find quiet lodging with a printer named Johannes Meyer, whose workshop produces medical texts among other works. His establishment offers you a unique window into the latest written knowledge about the disease, treatises and broadsides from physicians across Europe, often illustrated with woodcuts, vividly showing the characteristic symptoms. These sell quickly, Herr Meyer tells you, showing a pamphlet titled On the French Disease and Its Remedies by a Spanish Physician. Everyone seeks information, hoping to protect themselves or find relief for afflicted family members. The printer introduces you to Dr. Alexander Sannazaro, a physician who has written extensively on the epidemic. Dr. Sannazaro has developed a theory that the disease passed from animals to humans through improper sexual contact. A misguided, but at the time, an interesting attempt to explain its mysterious origins. The moral degradation of our time has invited this scourge. Dr. Sannazaro tells you solemnly, his voice a low, weighty hum. God permits such evils when men stray from natural law. His explanation, you note, blends emerging medical observation with traditional moral and religious frameworks, a characteristic blend of this transitional period in scientific thought. Through your quiet discussions with scholars and physicians in Heidelberg, you begin to gain a clearer picture of how medical understanding is slowly evolving in response to the epidemic. The traditional Galenic system, so long the bedrock of medical thought based on the four humours, is being stretched and strained to accommodate a disease that does not fit neatly into its established categories. Some practitioners are beginning to quietly question aspects of the ancient wisdom, while still largely working within its venerable framework. By the gentle summer of 1501, reports from across Europe indicate that the epidemic continues unabated, though perhaps with a subtle decrease in its virulence. The disease remains widespread, a pervasive presence, but fewer victims, it seems, progress to the most severe stages within a short time frame. Whether this represents a change in the disease itself or an increased immunity within the population remains unclear to contemporary observers. As you quietly reflect on your journey through epidemic-stricken Europe, you begin to recognize how profoundly this disease is shaping society, far beyond the obvious physical suffering. It has subtly transformed social norms, influenced art and literature, challenged long-held medical traditions, reinforced deeply ingrained religious interpretations of illness, and quietly altered intimate behaviors. Like the Black Death before it, this epidemic will leave an indelible mark on European culture and consciousness. On a warm evening, you find yourself sitting in the tranquil garden of a Heidelberg tavern, surrounded by a group of students and scholars, their voices a low, thoughtful murmur as they discuss the future. Despite the continuing presence of the disease, there is a cautious optimism among these educated young men. They speak with quiet excitement of new discoveries, new lands, new ideas breaking free from the constraints of medieval thought. We live in an age of wonders and terrors, says a young scholar of astronomy, his voice thoughtful. Columbus finds new worlds across the ocean, the Turks press against our eastern borders, strange diseases emerge, old certainties crumble, yet knowledge grows. Perhaps our children will understand what we can only question. His words, you realize, beautifully capture the paradox of this pivotal moment in history, a time of both unprecedented crisis and remarkable advancement. As darkness gently falls, and lanterns are lit around the garden, casting soft, warm glows, you ponder what the coming years will bring as Europe continues to grapple with this mysterious disease that has so quickly become deeply embedded in its medical, social, and cultural landscape. Your time in Heidelberg has been enlightening, illuminating the quiet evolution of knowledge. But as autumn gently approaches in 1501, you feel a gentle pull to continue your journey. France beckons, the kingdom whose soldiers first brought widespread attention to the disease that now, in much of Europe, bears their name. What might you discover in the land where it all began, at least in the European consciousness? You join a wine merchant, his seasoned face etched with the wisdom of the road, travelling to Strasbourg and then gently down the Rhine toward Paris. The merchant, Henry Beaufort, has been making this journey twice yearly for decades, quietly carrying German wines to eager French markets and returning with French luxuries for German customers. He is, you realize, a walking chronicle of changing times. When I began as a young man, the roads were more dangerous, but the people healthier, he tells you, his voice a low rumble, as your barge glides smoothly down the Rhine. Now we have better order, fewer robbers preying on merchants. But this new sickness makes everyone fearful of strangers. Henry explains how the disease has quietly affected his trade. Customers no longer drink from the same cups during wine tastings. Innkeepers, with a newfound caution, provide separate sleeping arrangements, where once travellers shared beds freely. In some towns, merchants from affected regions must remain outside the walls for a period before entering. He shrugs philosophically. We adapt. Life continues. Trade must flow. Through French countryside and Paris, the journey to Paris, a slow, meandering passage, takes nearly 3 weeks, following rivers where possible, their waters a calming presence, and roads where necessary. Along the way, Henry gently points out subtle changes in architecture, the cut of clothing, and local customs, as you quietly cross from German to French territories. Language, too, shifts gradually, with local dialects often more distinct from each other than the official tongues of distant courts. You pass through villages, their remnants still bearing the scars of the 100 Years' War, only recently ended. Some are still rebuilding, brick by quiet brick, after decades of brutal conflict between England and France. Others remain abandoned, their structures slowly reclaimed by forest and field, nature weaving a new tapestry over human sorrow. The common people, you reflect, have endured so much in recent generations. War, famine, the devastating plague, and now this new mysterious disease. Their quiet resilience is truly remarkable. In smaller settlements, you observe how rural communities quietly cope when the disease strikes. The spread is, you notice, somewhat slower than in crowded cities, but when it arrives, it often moves intimately through family groups. You hear hushed stories of entire households afflicted, with no one well enough to tend to the vital crops or animals. The rural understanding of the disease you discover differs somewhat from urban perspectives. Village healers, often wise women with a deep, inherited knowledge of traditional herbal remedies, offer treatments based on local plants. Guaiacum wood, when available, is used, but more often, native herbs like sassafras, sarsaparilla, and burdock, believed to purify the blood, are employed. Some of these, you quietly surmise, may actually have mild anti-inflammatory or immune, supporting properties, providing modest relief, even as their theoretical basis remains misunderstood. Religious responses are particularly strong and deeply felt in these rural areas. Solemn processions, special masses, and quiet pilgrimages to local shrines seek divine intervention against the relentless epidemic. Some villages revive older, pre-Christian practices alongside Christian observances, hanging protective herbs over doorways, burying symbolic objects at field boundaries, or observing specific taboos believed to ward off illness. As your journey continues, you pass through increasingly prosperous lands along the Rhine River. Vineyards climb the sun-drenched hillsides, their vines promising the famous Rhine wines exported throughout Europe. Ancient castles perch on strategic heights, silent guardians of the landscape, home to the proud nobility who control local territories. River traffic is constant, a gentle hum of commerce, with barges laden with goods moving steadily between major trading centres. At one riverside inn, you meet a group of students returning to Heidelberg after the quiet winter break. They are eager to share the latest medical discussions from the university, where physicians with quiet intensity are carefully documenting the progression and symptoms of the perplexing disease. Professor Theodoricus has identified distinct stages, explains a serious young man named Heinrich, his voice earnest. The primary stage with a single sore, usually on the private parts, the secondary with a widespread rash and fever. And now he's describing a tertiary stage that may appear years later with Gummer's fey large, rubbery swellings, fey and afflictions of the brain and heart. Another student adds, they're debating whether it's truly new or if it's related to other diseases. Some say it's a more virulent form of leprosy, others that it's an entirely novel contagion brought from the islands Columbus discovered. The students you observe are brimming with theoretical knowledge, but possess little practical experience in gently treating the afflicted. Still, their systematic approach to understanding the disease represents an important shift in medical thinking, a quiet move toward careful observation and classification that will eventually lead to more effective treatments. You reach Heidelberg as spring blooms across the Neckar Valley. The town is dominated by its ancient university and the imposing castle of the Electors Palatine, who rule this territory. Situated at the junction of major trade routes, it's a place where ideas and goods flow freely, making it both intellectually vibrant and sadly vulnerable to the quiet spread of disease. Paris, a city's embrace and its hidden scars. As you approach Paris, the city announces itself from afar, a gentle haze of smoke hovering over its clustered spires and ancient towers, their forms softened by the distance. Unlike the walled Italian cities you've known, Paris has long outgrown its fortifications, sprawling beyond old boundaries into surrounding fields, its very growth a testament to its vibrant life. It is one of Europe's largest cities, home to perhaps 100,000 souls, all crowded into narrow streets and multi-story buildings, each window a silent witness to countless lives. You quietly part ways with Henry, who is headed to the wine merchant's quay, and find lodging near the University of Paris. The Latin Quarter, as it's known, buzzes with a quiet energy, alive with students and scholars speaking the international language of learning. Booksellers, copyists and stationers cluster around the university, supplying the tools of intellectual trade, their shops filled with the hushed rustle of paper and the faint scent of ink. Taverns overflow with young men, their voices a low murmur as they debate philosophy, theology, and increasingly the subtle complexities of medicine. The University of Paris has long been one of Europe's great centres of medical learning. Its faculty physicians, trained in the venerable Galenic tradition, are among the most respected in Christendom. Yet they, like their counterparts across Europe, have been humbled by this new disease that defies their classical understanding. You make the acquaintance of a medical student named Jean-Claude, a thoughtful young man who offers to show you the H-fatal dew, Paris's ancient hospital, nestled quietly near Notre Dame Cathedral. Founded centuries ago by the Church, it provides care for the poor and indigent, relying on the quiet labour of nuns and the generous charity of the wealthy. The Hôtel is a sobering sight, its long wards housing dozens of patients, often with 2 or 3 to a bed. The air is thick with the mingled smells of sickness, unwashed bodies, and the faint, sweet scent of herbal remedies. Nuns move efficiently and quietly between beds, offering food, drink, and basic care. Physicians make their rounds once daily, examining patients briefly and prescribing treatments based on humoral theory, bloodletting for those deemed too hot and wet, warming substances for those too cold and dry. They've set aside a separate ward for those with the French disease, Jean, Claude tells you, pointing to a doorway from which a nun emerges, carrying soiled linens, her face serene. Too many cases to ignore, though the masters still debate whether it's truly new or just a virulent form of leprosy. Later, over wine in a student tavern, its atmosphere softened by the evening light, Jean-Claude explains the current medical thinking at the university. The faculty is divided. The traditionalists insist Galen's system can explain all diseases. They see the French disease as a corruption of the humours, caused by an unfavourable celestial alignment and perhaps bad air. But some younger physicians argue it's something entirely new, requiring new approaches. He lowers his voice slightly, leaning in. There's growing interest in the methods used by barber, surgeons, and empirics, fey mercury treatments, guaiacum decoctions, even cauterization of the initial sores. Methods the learned physicians once dismissed as crude are now being studied, if quietly. This subtle tension between traditional medical authority and practical innovation reflects broader currents in European thought. The Renaissance revival of classical learning, paradoxically, created both a deep reverence for ancient knowledge and the very tools to challenge it. As you've witnessed throughout your journey, this epidemic is accelerating that process, gently forcing practical innovation, even while theoretical frameworks lag behind. During your stay in Paris, you quietly explore the city's response to the epidemic at various social levels. The royal court under Louis XIII has been touched by the disease. Rumours suggest several courtiers have been quietly sent to country estates to recover or to die out of public view. The king's physicians recommend preventative measures, moderate living, avoidance of excessive food and drink, limited sexual contact, and regular bathing in herb-infused water. A gentle, fragrant attempt at cleanliness. The nobility and wealthy merchants can afford private care and the most expensive treatments. An apothecary near the fashionable Marais district shows you his stock of exotic remedies, guaiacum wood imported at great expense from the New World, mercury preparations, herbal compounds with ingredients from as far as China and India. These cost more than a labourer might earn in months, accessible only to the privileged few. For the great lords we prepare special remedies they can take discreetly, the apothecary confides, his voice a low whisper. Pills containing gold leaf and pearl powder, said to purify noble blood. Do they work? Who can say? But they satisfy those who believe their blood is different from common folk. The middle classes, fey guild masters, prosperous merchants, university graduates, they seek treatment from licensed physicians and reputable apothecaries. They can afford mercury treatments and some imported remedies, though often in less elaborate formulations than the nobility receive. They follow physician recommendations about diet, bathing, and lifestyle, having both the knowledge and means to modify their behaviours. The working poor rely on barber surgeons who are more affordable than physicians. These practitioners have limited formal education, but substantial practical experience. They lance sores, apply topical remedies, perform bloodletting, and administer mercury treatments in less refined forms. Their approach is hands-on and results, oriented with little concern for theoretical explanations. For the destitute, only charity offers hope of treatment. Religious orders and wealthy benefactors support institutions like the H-Fatal Dieu. Some parishes maintain small hospices for their sick poor. The care is basic fey-clean bedding, regular meals, prayer, and simple treatments. Fey but represents the only option for many victims. What strikes you most is how the epidemic quietly crosses social boundaries, while responses to it often reinforce them. The disease affects all classes, but the experience of it remains profoundly unequal. The wealthy suffer privately, with the best available care. The poor suffer publicly, with minimal assistance. After several weeks in Paris, you decide to venture into the quiet countryside of northern France. Reports suggest the disease is particularly widespread in Normandy, where many soldiers from the Naples campaign originated. You hire a horse and join a party of cloth merchants travelling to Rouen, once a stronghold of English occupation during the Long War, now quietly returning to prosperity under French rule. The journey takes you through rolling farmland, gently punctuated by woodlands and small villages. The autumn harvest is underway, with peasants working communally to bring in crops before winter. Despite the epidemic's quiet shadow, the rhythm of agricultural life continues much as it has for centuries. The demands of survival leave little room for disruption, even from disease. In one village where you stop for the night, you witness how rural families quietly cope when the disease strikes. A farmer named Michel has been suffering for nearly a year. His symptoms began with a single sore that healed on its own, followed by a widespread rash and bone pains that made agricultural labour nearly impossible. My neighbours helped with the planting, and will help with the harvest, he tells you, his voice weary but grateful, as he sits by his cottage door, too weak to join the work in the fields. Without them, my family would starve. Next year, God willing, I'll do the same for whoever needs aid. Michel's wife has prepared a bath of herbs gathered from the surrounding countryside, fay comfrey, chamomile, and others you don't recognise. It eases his pain for a time, she explains. The travelling barber gave us a mercury ointment, but it made him worse. His gums bled and his hands shook so badly he couldn't hold a cup. This pattern repeats across the countryside, communal support quietly filling gaps left by inadequate medical care. Practical experience leading to the quiet rejection of treatments that cause more harm than good. Without formal knowledge, rural communities are developing their own understanding of the disease through painful trial and error. Religious practices offer another deep response to the epidemic. In one village, you witness a procession honouring Saint Roch, patron saint of plague and infectious disease. Villagers carry candles and relics through the streets, their steps slow and measured, stopping at homes where the sick lie suffering. Priests offer blessings and last rites. Despite the limited physical benefit, these rituals provide profound psychological comfort and quietly maintain community solidarity in the face of suffering. As you approach Paris, the countryside grows more densely populated and prosperous. Fields are well tended, villages larger and more frequent. The Royal Road is busy with travellers, fay merchants, pilgrims, nobles with their entourages, royal messengers on urgent business. At night, you stay in progressively better inns, catering to this steady traffic. Paris announces itself from afar, a haze of smoke hanging over clustered spires and towers. Unlike Italian cities with their defensive walls, Paris has outgrown its fortifications, sprawling beyond the old boundaries into surrounding fields. It's one of Europe's largest cities, home to perhaps 100,000 souls, crowded into narrow streets and multi-storey buildings. You part ways with Henri, who is headed to the wine merchant's quay, and find lodging near the University of Paris. The Latin Quarter, as it's known, buzzes with students and scholars speaking the international language of learning. Booksellers, copyists and stationers cluster around the university, supplying the tools of intellectual trade. Taverns overflow with young men arguing philosophy, theology, and, increasingly, medicine. The University of Paris has long been one of Europe's great centres of medical learning. Its faculty physicians, trained in Galenic tradition, are among the most respected in Christendom. Yet they, like their counterparts across Europe, have been humbled by this new disease that defies their classical understanding. You make the acquaintance of a medical student named Jean-Claude, who offers to show you the H-Fatal Dieu, Paris's ancient hospital near Notre Dame Cathedral, founded centuries ago by the Church. It provides care for the poor and indigent, relying on the labour of nuns and the charity of the wealthy. The H-Fatal Dieu is a sobering sight. Long wards house dozens of patients, often with 2 or 3 to a bed. The air is thick with the smells of sickness, unwashed bodies, and herbal remedies. Nuns move efficiently between beds, offering food, drink, and basic care. Physicians make rounds once daily, examining patients briefly and prescribing treatments based on humoral theory. Bloodletting for those deemed too hot and wet, warming substances for those too cold and dry. They've set aside a separate ward for those with the French disease, Jean-Claude tells you, pointing to a doorway from which a nun emerges, carrying soiled linens. Too many cases to ignore, though the masters still debate whether it's truly new or just a virulent form of leprosy. Later, over wine in a student tavern, Jean-Claude explains the current medical thinking at the university. The faculty is divided. The traditionalists insist Galen's system can explain all diseases. They see the French disease as a corruption of the humours caused by an unfavourable celestial alignment and perhaps bad air. But some younger physicians argue it's something entirely new, requiring new approaches. He lowers his voice. There's growing interest in the methods used by Barber, surgeons and empirics, Fey mercury treatments, guaiacum decoctions, even cauterization of the initial sores. Methods the learned physicians once dismissed as crude are now being studied, if quietly. This tension between traditional medical authority and practical innovation reflects broader currents in European thought. The Renaissance revival of classical learning, paradoxically, created both reverence for ancient knowledge and tools to challenge it. As you've witnessed throughout your journey, this epidemic is accelerating that process, forcing practical innovation, even while theoretical frameworks lag behind. During your stay in Paris, you explore the city's response to the epidemic at various social levels. The royal court, under Louis XIII, has been touched by the disease. Rumours suggest several courtiers have been quietly sent to country estates to recover or die out of public view. The king's physicians recommend preventative measures, moderate living, avoidance of excessive food and drink, limited sexual contact, and regular bathing in herb-infused water. The nobility and wealthy merchants can afford private care and the most expensive treatments. An apothecary near the fashionable Marais district shows you his stock of exotic remedies, guaiacum wood imported at great expense from the New World, mercury preparations, herbal compounds with ingredients from as far as China and India. These cost more than a labourer might earn in months, accessible only to the privileged few. For the great lords, we prepare special remedies they can take discreetly, the apothecary confides. Pills containing gold leaf and pearl powder, said to purify noble blood. Do they work? Who can say? But they satisfy those who believe their blood is different from common folk. The middle classes, Fey Guild masters, prosperous merchants, university graduates, Fey seek treatment from licensed physicians and reputable apothecaries. They can afford mercury treatments and some imported remedies, though often in less elaborate formulations than the nobility receive. They follow physician recommendations about diet, bathing, and lifestyle, having both the knowledge and means to modify their behaviours. The working poor rely on barber surgeons who are more affordable than physicians. These practitioners have limited formal education but substantial practical experience. They lance sores, apply topical remedies, perform bloodletting, and administer mercury treatments in less refined forms. Their approach is hands-on and results-oriented, with little concern for theoretical explanations. For the destitute, only charity offers hope of treatment. Religious orders and wealthy benefactors support institutions like the H-Fatal. Some parishes maintain small hospices for their sick poor. The The care is basic fey-clean bedding, regular meals, prayer, and simple treatments. Fey but represents the only option for many victims. What strikes you most is how the epidemic crosses social boundaries, while responses to it reinforce them. The disease affects all classes, but the experience of it remains profoundly unequal. The wealthy suffer privately with the best available care. The poor suffer publicly with minimal assistance. Rouen's quiet resilience. After several quiet weeks in Paris, you decide to venture into the countryside of northern France. Reports suggest the disease is particularly widespread in Normandy, where many soldiers from the Naples campaign originated. You hire a horse and join a party of cloth merchants travelling to Rouen. Once a stronghold of English occupation during the Long War, now quietly returning to prosperity under French rule. The journey takes you through rolling farmland, gently punctuated by woodlands and small villages. The autumn harvest is underway, with peasants working communally to bring in crops before winter. Despite the epidemic's quiet shadow, the rhythm of agricultural life continues much as it has for centuries. The demands of survival leave little room for disruption, even from disease. In one village where you stop for the night, you witness how rural families quietly cope when the disease strikes. A farmer named Michel has been suffering for nearly a year. His symptoms began with a single sore that healed on its own, followed by a widespread rash and bone pains that made agricultural labour nearly impossible. My neighbours helped with the planting, and will help with the harvest, he tells you, his voice weary but grateful, as he sits by his cottage door, too weak to join the work in the fields. Without them, my family would starve. Next year, God willing, I'll do the same for whoever needs aid. Michel's wife has prepared a bath of herbs gathered from the surrounding countryside, fay comfrey, chamomile, and others you don't recognise. It eases his pain for a time, she explains. The travelling barber gave us a mercury ointment, but it made him worse. His gums bled and his hands shook so badly he couldn't hold a cup. This pattern repeats across the countryside, communal support quietly filling gaps left by inadequate medical care, practical experience leading to the quiet rejection of treatments that cause more harm than good. Without formal knowledge, rural communities are developing their own understanding of the disease through painful trial and error. You reach Rouen as the days grow shorter and colder. This prosperous port city on the Seine has been rebuilt since the war's end and now bustles with quiet commerce. English wool arrives to be woven into fine cloth by skilled artisans. Wine and other goods travel downriver to the Atlantic coast. The magnificent cathedral dominates the skyline, its Gothic spire reaching toward heaven. Through connections provided by the cloth merchants, you find lodging with a widow who supplements her income by renting rooms to respectable travellers. Madame Beauchamp is well informed about local affairs and shares the city's experience with the epidemic. When the first cases appeared 6 years ago, there was panic, she tells you, her voice a low murmur as she serves a simple but hearty beef stew. People blamed the returning soldiers, especially those who'd been in Naples. Some were driven from their homes, denied their livelihoods. The bishop had to preach against this cruelty, reminding the congregation that Christ called us to care for the sick, not shun them. Over time, Rouen developed a more organised response. The city council established a special hospice for those with the French disease, supported by taxes and donations. Barber surgeons receive training from physicians on recognising and treating the condition. Public bathhouses are regularly inspected and required to change water between customers. It hasn't stopped the disease, but fewer people die in the streets or suffer alone. Madame Beauchamp says with practical compassion, and the fear has lessened. We've learned to live with this affliction, as we've lived with others before it. During your stay in Rouen, you observe how the epidemic has quietly influenced artistic expression. In the cathedral, a new stained glass window depicts Job, the biblical figure whose suffering from painful sores has made him a patron saint for those with skin diseases. Local painters incorporate symbolic references to the epidemic in religious works. Angels with flaming swords representing divine punishment. Saints offering protection to the afflicted. More secular expressions appear in the popular broadsides sold by street vendors. These single-page prints combine woodcut illustrations with simple text, accessible to semi-literate audiences. Some offer medical advice of varying quality. Others use the disease as a moral lesson, showing debauched youths developing telltale symptoms. A few are purely satirical, quietly mocking physicians and their ineffective treatments. You also notice subtle changes in social customs. People greet each other with slight bows, rather than embraces or kisses. Communal drinking vessels have disappeared from taverns, replaced by individual cups. Young couples are chaperoned more strictly, and parents investigate potential marriage partners with increasing thoroughness. The shadow of the disease has made intimacy itself suspect. As winter sets in, you decide to remain in Rouen until spring makes travel easier. You find work with a printer who produces medical texts, using your experiences to help edit a compendium of treatments for the French disease. The position offers insight into how medical knowledge circulates and evolves in response to practical outcomes. The printer, Guillaume de Moulin, explains the market for such works. Physicians buy them to compare observations with colleagues across Europe. Barber, surgeons, and apothecaries seek practical instructions. Even some educated laypeople purchase them, hoping to treat family members or themselves without the expense of a physician. Through this work, you track how treatments are evolving. Mercury remains dominant, but administered with increasing caution and in more refined forms. Guaiacum from the New World gains popularity, especially after several prominent patients report improvement following treatment. Various herbal decoctions, fey sarsaparilla, sassafras, China root fey, are gaining advocates, particularly for relieving pain and secondary symptoms. The most interesting reports come from physicians who combine approaches, Guillaume tells you. Those who use mercury more sparingly, alternating with herbal remedies and careful attention to diet fey, they claim better results than those who rely on a single method. This emerging empirical approach, learning through systematic trial and observation, rather than theoretical deduction, represents an important shift in medical thinking. Though practitioners don't fully understand why certain treatments help or harm, they're beginning to develop more nuanced protocols based on observed outcomes. During the long winter evenings, you join discussions at a local tavern, frequented by physicians, apothecaries, and other educated professionals. Conversations reveal how the epidemic is influencing broader intellectual currents. The ancients described many diseases with remarkable accuracy, argues an older physician trained at Montpellier. Yet none matches this French disease precisely. Either it's truly new, which challenges the notion that all important knowledge was known to the ancients, or they knew it by another name, which means we've misunderstood their texts. Either possibility disrupts the Renaissance reverence for classical authority. If new diseases can emerge, what other new phenomena might exist beyond ancient knowledge? If ancient texts have been misinterpreted, how reliable is inherited wisdom on other subjects? As winter gradually yields to spring in 1502, you reflect on all you've witnessed during your journey through epidemic-stricken Europe. You've seen how a single disease can transform societies, challenging established medical paradigms, reshaping social interactions, influencing artistic expression, and reinforcing or occasionally bridging social divisions. Most profoundly, you've observed humanity's remarkable adaptability, from Venice's sophisticated public health measures to rural villages' communal support systems, from physicians evolving treatments to individuals changing intimate behaviours. People have responded to the epidemic with creativity and resilience, even amid suffering and fear. As the days lengthen and travel becomes possible again, You consider where your journey might take you next. After witnessing the epidemic's impact in Italy, Germany, and France, perhaps England beckons, or the Iberian Peninsula, where Columbus launched his momentous voyages. Or you might return to Italy, to observe how the situation has evolved since your departure nearly 2 years ago. Wherever you go, you carry with you a deeper understanding of how disease shapes history, not just through death and suffering, but through humanity's diverse and persistent responses to that suffering. The French disease, like the Black Death before it, will leave Europe transformed in ways both obvious and subtle, yet enduring. Across the Channel to England, with spring gently warming the Norman countryside, you decide that England will be your next destination. The disease reached the island kingdom around 1497, and you are curious to see how this somewhat isolated nation has responded to the pervasive epidemic. In Rouen's busy port, filled with the quiet bustle of commerce, you secure passage on a wool merchant's vessel bound for London, bidding a quiet farewell to Madame Beauchamp and the printer Guillaume, whose hospitality made the long winter months both comfortable and enlightening. The Channel crossing proves mercifully smooth, the waters calm beneath the gentle sway of the ship. You have heard tales of terrible storms that can transform this narrow sea into a death trap for unwary sailors. Yet today, the small ship pitches and rolls just enough to lull you into a comfortable rhythm. Though most passengers remain confined to the deck's railings, their faces tinged green with seasickness. You manage better than most, your steady composure earning the quiet respect of the English captain. First time I took this route was 30 years ago. Captain Thomas tells you, his voice a low rumble as he shares a cup of ale, its bitterness a welcome contrast to the salty air, back when King Edward still sat on England's throne. Since then, I've seen 3 kings come and go, Edward, Richard, and Henry. He shakes his head slowly at the swift passage of time. And now young Henry VIII has just taken the crown. The captain is a valuable source of information about how the epidemic quietly reached England's shores. We first heard rumours from French ports around 986. He recalls, his gaze distant. By 987, cases appeared in London, Portsmouth, Bristol, Fay, anywhere with active harbours. Sailors brought it as they bring all things good and ill from foreign shores. He continues, his voice a quiet narrative. King Henry VII, God rest him, just passed 2 months ago. He was a cautious man, suspicious of foreigners. Even before the disease arrived, after it came, he tightened port restrictions, limited foreign merchants' movements. Some say it slowed the spread, others that it merely drove the afflicted into hiding, fearing deportation. As your ship gently enters the Thames estuary, the landscape slowly unfolds before you, green marshes giving way to increasingly dense settlement as you approach the city. London announces itself with a forest of ship masts, their bare branches reaching toward the sky. Then the imposing tower, its ancient stones steeped in history, and the singular, majestic dome of St. Paul's Cathedral. Hundreds of small boats dart across the river like water insects, carrying people and goods between the shores. You disembark at a bustling wharf, instantly surrounded by the quiet clamour of commerce. Porters shout offers to carry baggage, their voices gruff but inviting. Vendors sell hot pies and ale, their calls mingling with the customs officials quietly examining cargo. The rich smell of the river mingles with wood smoke, the enticing aroma of roasting meat, the yeasty vapours of breweries, and the indefinable scent of thousands of humans living in close proximity. England feels both familiar and foreign after your time on the continent. Its language shares roots with German, but sounds entirely different. Architecture shows Norman influences, but with distinctive English elements. Fashion seems a season or two behind Paris, with subtle variations that mark it as uniquely English. Through Captain Thomas's recommendation, you find quiet lodging at the Tabard Inn in Southwark, across the river from the city proper. This ancient establishment is known for hosting pilgrims travelling to Canterbury. immortalised in Chaucer's famous tales, written a century earlier. The innkeeper, Master Baxter, is a third-generation host, his mind a treasure trove of stories about famous guests and London's changing fortunes. "My grandfather welcomed Chaucer himself," he boasts, though you suspect the timeline doesn't quite support this claim. "And my father saw Jack Cade's rebellion come right past our door. Me, I've seen the sweating sickness take thousands, and now this French pox making its rounds." Master Baxter proves a valuable guide to London's quiet response to the epidemic. The city's governance is complex. The Crown, the City Corporation, the parishes, and the guilds all hold overlapping authority. This creates a patchwork approach to public health, less centralised than Venice's systematic measures, but more organised than the rural responses you've witnessed. "The mayor ordered examinations of bathhouses and stews," Master Baxter explains, using the English term for brothels. "Many were closed, especially here in Southwark, where the Bishop of Winchester licensed them for centuries. The city physicians advised against shared cups and bedding. Some parishes established special almshouses for their afflicted poor." You learn that London, unlike some continental cities, has no designated hospital solely for those with the French pox. Instead, existing institutions, Fay St Bartholomew's, St Thomas's, and various parish infirmaries have adapted to quietly accommodate the growing number of cases. Treatment, you find, varies, depending on a patient's means and connections. London's healing hands over the coming days. You quietly explore London's medical landscape. Through a letter of introduction from Guillaume, the printer, you meet Dr. Thomas Lineker, one of England's most prominent physicians, recently returned from Italy, where he studied at Padua. Lineker represents the new Renaissance learning taking quiet root in England. "Our medical knowledge lags behind Italy's," he admits, his voice thoughtful, as he shows you his impressive library, its shelves filled with ancient texts. "But we're advancing quickly. I've translated several Greek medical texts previously unavailable in England. King Henry VII has shown interest in establishing a college of physicians to regulate practice and raise standards." Dr. Lineker's approach to the French pox reflects his humanist education. "We must return to original Hippocratic principles, careful observation, detailed case histories, attention to environmental factors." The Arab commentators and medieval schoolmen obscured much of this wisdom. You inquire about specific treatments employed in England. Lineker sighs, a quiet exhalation. "Much the same as elsewhere. Mercury remains the primary recourse, though I advise more moderate application than most. Guaiacum from the Indies shows promise, especially for alleviating bone pains. Some colleagues report success with China root and sarsaparilla. More revealing is Lineker's candid assessment of mercury's limitations. "I've documented numerous cases where the treatment causes worse symptoms than the disease. Excessive salivation, tremors, loss of teeth, confusion. Yet patients demand it, believing stronger reactions indicate more effective medicine. It's difficult to persuade them otherwise." This tension between patient expectations and physician observations highlights the quiet challenges of medical practice, where popular understanding often lags behind emerging knowledge, with patients often preferring dramatic treatments with visible effects over gentler approaches. Regardless of outcomes, through your connection with Lineker, you gain access to St Bartholomew's Hospital, one of London's oldest charitable institutions, founded in the 12th century. Bart's, as it's affectionately known, has evolved from a monastic infirmary to a substantial hospital serving London's poor. The dissolution of the monasteries still lies in the future, so religious brothers and sisters continue to provide much of the nursing care. Brother Michael, who oversees a ward housing several pox victims, explains the hospital's approach. "We separate them from others, when possible, though space constraints often make this impossible. We provide clean bedding, nutritious food, basic wound care for those who can tolerate it. Mercury treatment is offered. Otherwise, we focus on comfort and spiritual consolation. The ward is sobering. A long room with beds lining both walls, each containing one or two patients in various stages of illness. The air carries the distinct odour of disease, mingled with herbal remedies and the smoke from a central hearth. Attendants move quietly between beds, changing dressings, offering drinks, emptying waste vessels. Brother Michael introduces you to several patients willing to share their stories. One, a former sailor named Will, contracted the disease in Calais 3 years earlier. Started with a single sore, no bigger than a penny, he tells you, his voice raspy. Thought nothing of it when it healed. Then came the rash and fevers. Could no longer work the rigging with my joints so pained. Captain put me ashore here when I could no longer earn my keep. Will's condition has stabilised, but left him permanently disabled, unable to return to his former profession. The hospital provides shelter and basic care, but his future remains uncertain. His story exemplifies the quiet economic impact of the epidemic. Lost livelihoods, increased dependency, strained charitable resources. Another patient, Margaret, represents a different path to infection. A domestic servant in a wealthy merchant's home, she married a man who had previously contracted the disease during military service in France, unaware of his condition. She became infected and now suffers advanced symptoms, including destructive lesions on her face. My husband died last winter, she tells you softly. His family blames me for bewitching him, refuses to acknowledge me as his widow. My former employers dismissed me when the marks appeared. Without Barts, I would be begging on the streets. Margaret's situation illustrates how the disease exacerbates existing social vulnerabilities, particularly for women, limited economic opportunities, dependency on marriage for security, and the cruel stigma of visible symptoms create cascading misfortunes from which few paths to recovery exist. Beyond the hospital, you explore how different social classes in London experience and respond to the epidemic. Through Lineker's connections, you glimpse the situation among the nobility and wealthy merchants. When afflicted, they receive treatment in the privacy of their homes, attended by physicians who maintain discretion. Mercury chambers, enclosed cabinets where patients sit exposed to mercury vapour, represent the most sophisticated treatment available, though not necessarily the most effective. London's substantial middle-class guildmasters, successful merchants, lawyers and other professionals follow physicians' preventative advice more diligently than most. They modify behaviours, improve personal hygiene, avoid suspected transmission routes. When ill, they can afford moderate treatment without the extravagance of the nobility. The working poor, apprentices, journeymen, labourers, small shopkeepers rely on barber, surgeons and apothecaries for affordable care. Self-treatment with herbal remedies purchased from market vendors is common. Those with guild affiliations may receive support from these organisations when unable to work, providing a crucial safety net absent for many others. For the destitute, beggars, orphans, the disabled elderly without family support, only parish charity or institutions like Barts offer hope of care. Many suffer and die in the streets or crowded tenements, their cases unrecorded except in parish burial registers showing increased deaths from consumption or simply fever. Distinct from continental cities, London's response includes uniquely English elements, reflecting its social and political structures. Parish vestries, local governing bodies overseeing church affairs and poor relief, take primary responsibility for their afflicted residents, rather than centralising care. Guilds provide support for members and their families, creating occupationally based safety nets. The City Corporation, London's municipal government, focuses on regulation and prevention rather than direct treatment. England's green and gentle land. After several quiet weeks in London, you venture into the English countryside, curious how rural communities are faring. You travel with a cloth merchant visiting wool producers in the Cotswolds, a region of rolling hills and prosperous market towns where sheep farming has created considerable wealth. The pastoral landscape appears idyllic, stone villages nestled in green valleys, fields divided by dry stone walls, sheep grazing peacefully on hillsides. Yet even here the epidemic has reached, though with less intensity than in densely populated London. In Cirencester, a substantial market town where your merchant companion has business, you meet the local barber surgeon, Master Simons. His practice serves the town and surrounding villages, providing everything from haircuts to tooth extractions, bloodletting to setting broken bones. Cases of the French pox are increasingly common among his patients. First appeared about 4 years ago, he tells you in his shop, where razors and surgical tools hang on the wall alongside dried herbs and alchemical equipment. A wool merchant returned from London with the telltale signs. Since then, I've treated perhaps 24 cases, mostly men who travelled to cities for business or pleasure. Master Simons's treatments reflect practical experience, modified by limited access to exotic remedies. Mercury I use sparingly, too easy to poison the patient. I prefer a salve of my own devising for the sores, containing comfrey and honey. For the bone pains, willow bark decoction. When available, I incorporate guaiacum, but supplies are limited and costly here. His pragmatic approach, free from rigid adherence to medical theory, sometimes achieves better outcomes than more learned physicians' treatments. Several of his patients have maintained their livelihoods despite the disease, adapting when symptoms flare rather than succumbing to debilitating mercury poisoning. Through Master Simons, you meet local families affected by the epidemic. The Coopers Fay John, a wheelwright, his wife Anne, and their 3 surviving children Fay demonstrate the disease's quiet impact on family structures. John contracted the pox in Oxford 2 years earlier and unwittingly infected Anne. Their youngest child, born after infection, shows signs of congenital transmission, curved leg bones, and notched teeth. We manage as we can, Anne tells you softly, as she continues her household tasks despite visible discomfort. Neighbours help when John's hands pain him too much for fine work. The older children have learned to assist with tasks beyond their years. We pray for strength and endure. The Cooper family exemplifies the quiet suffering in countless households across Europe, where the disease disrupts livelihoods, strains relationships, and alters children's futures. Unlike urban victims who might access institutional care, rural families largely cope through extended family networks and community support, continuing productive work whenever possible. In the village church, you notice a new fresco depicting Saint Fiacre, traditionally associated with healing skin diseases. The priest, Father Thomas, explains that veneration of particular healing saints has increased since the epidemic began. People seek heavenly intercession when earthly remedies fail. Saint Fiacre, Saint Job, Saint Roch all receive more prayers and offerings than before. The religious response in England remains firmly Catholic at this time. Henry VIII's break with Rome still lies decades in the future. Masses for the afflicted, processions imploring divine mercy, increased donations for church hospitals all form part of the spiritual campaign against the epidemic. Yet Father Thomas also acknowledges practical measures. I advise my parishioners on cleanliness and moderation in all things, he tells you. God's mercy works through natural means as well as miraculous ones. Prudence in daily habits is not contrary to faith in divine healing. After your rural sojourn, you return to London as summer approaches. The city prepares for a momentous event, the coronation of the new King Henry VIII, following his father's death in April. Despite the ongoing epidemic, a sense of optimism pervades the city. The young king, not yet 18, represents a new generation and fresh possibilities after his father's austere rule. The old king was careful with coin and foreign entanglements, observes Master Baxter at the Tabard. No one seems more generous, more learned, more grand in his ambitions, Whether that bodes well or ill for England remains to be seen. You witness elaborate preparations for the coronation procession. Buildings decorated with tapestries and banners, streets cleaned of refuse, temporary grandstands erected for spectators. For a brief time, the shadow of the epidemic recedes as London anticipates celebration. Yet even amid festivities, the disease remains present, in bandaged limbs among the crowd, in absent faces too ill to attend, in whispered concerns about contagion in large gatherings. As June 1509 approaches, you prepare for the next stage of your journey. After observing the epidemic's impact in Italy, Germany, France, and England, you decide to continue to the Iberian Peninsula, Spain and Portugal, the launching points for Columbus's voyages, and the source of many theories about the disease's origins. Before departing, you visit Dr. Lineker one final time. He has been quietly collating observations from physicians across England, creating what would now be recognised as epidemiological data. His parchments show maps marking outbreaks, tables of symptoms and progression, notes on treatment outcomes. Knowledge accumulates slowly, he tells you, his voice calm, but it does accumulate. Each careful observation, properly recorded and shared, builds our understanding. Perhaps not in my lifetime, but eventually this disease will yield its secrets to rational inquiry. His words capture the emerging scientific worldview, empirical, methodical, patient that will eventually transform medicine from an art based on ancient authorities to a science grounded in verifiable evidence. The French pox, challenging traditional medical frameworks, quietly accelerates this transition despite the suffering it causes. As you book passage on a merchant vessel bound for Lisbon, you reflect on all you've witnessed in England. Like everywhere, the epidemic crosses social boundaries, while responses reinforce them. Like everywhere, existing institutions adapt rather than transform. Like everywhere, individuals show remarkable resilience amid suffering. Yet England's island nature and distinct social structures have shaped unique aspects of its response. The parish-based approach to care, the early development of systematic record, keeping under physicians like Lineker, the practical adaptation of Barber, surgeons like Master Simons. These differences, subtle but significant, remind you that no epidemic manifests identically across cultures. Local conditions, resources, and traditions always influence both impact and response. As your ship prepares to sail with the tide, you stand at the rail, watching London gently recede into the distance. 7 years have passed since the first major outbreak in Naples, and still the disease maintains its quiet grip on Europe. Yet life continues. Commerce flows, knowledge advances, communities quietly support their vulnerable members. Individuals adapt to changed circumstances. The epidemic has become woven into the fabric of European society, no longer a shocking novelty, but an established feature of the landscape. How it will continue to shape that landscape, medically, socially, intellectually, in coming decades remains to be seen. Your journey to the Iberian Peninsula promises new insights into this ongoing transformation. Across the waves to Lisbon, the journey from London to Lisbon takes nearly 2 weeks, a relatively swift passage blessed by favourable winds and calm seas. Your vessel is a Portuguese caravel, a sturdy ocean-going ship of the type that carried intrepid explorers around Africa to India and across the vast Atlantic to the New World. The crew is seasoned, having made this voyage many times, and they regale passengers with hushed tales of distant lands and strange peoples, their voices a low murmur against the rhythmic creak of the ship. The captain, Duarte Pacheco, has sailed with some of Portugal's greatest explorers. I was with Bartholomew Dias when we rounded the Cape of Good Hope, he tells you proudly, his eyes distant with memory. And I've spoken with men who accompanied Vasco da Gama to India. The world is opening before us, revealing wonders beyond imagination. You inquire whether he knew Columbus or any who sailed with him. The captain's expression sours slightly. Columbus sought Portuguese patronage first, before turning to Spain. Our king rejected his proposal wisely, I think, as his calculations of Earth's circumference were wildly mistaken. He found land where he expected India, but it was mere fortune that prevented his expedition's failure. This Portuguese perspective on Columbus, somewhat dismissive, emphasizing his errors while acknowledging his luck, contrasts sharply with the reverential treatment he often receives in Spain and Italy. It reminds you how history appears differently, depending on who tells the story, how narratives shift with the teller. As your ship approaches the Iberian coast, the landscape quietly transforms from the verdant fields of northern Europe to the more arid golden hills of the south. The light is different here, clearer, more intense, casting sharper shadows. The air carries unfamiliar scents, unfamiliar herbs, different cooking spices, the distinctive fragrance of cork and olive groves, a sensory awakening to a new land. Lisbon reveals itself dramatically as your ship enters the Tagus estuary, a city of white buildings climbing hills above the sparkling river, crowned by the imposing Castelo de Sfeo Jorge. The harbour buzzes with unprecedented activity as ships arrive from and depart for Portuguese outposts in Africa, India, and Brazil, carrying spices, gold, exotic woods, and other treasures that have made Portugal suddenly wealthy and powerful. As you disembark, the vibrant, multinational character of Lisbon becomes immediately apparent. Portuguese sailors mingle with African labourers, Jewish merchants. Despite official expulsion, many remain by converting, at least outwardly, Moorish craftsmen and visitors from throughout Europe and beyond. The streets ring with multiple languages, and market stalls display goods from 4 continents, a testament to Portugal's global reach. You find lodging in the Alfama district, the oldest part of the city, where narrow, winding streets climb the hillside. Your host, Senhora Cardoso, is a widow who supports herself by renting rooms to respectable travellers. Her late husband was a carpenter who worked on ships for the East India trade, and their modest home contains curiosities he brought back: carved ivory from Africa, patterned textiles from India, exotic shells from distant shores. Senhora Cardoso proves an invaluable guide to Lisbon's experience with the French disease, which Portuguese physicians were among the first to connect with Columbus's voyages. It appeared here around 1496, she tells you, her voice low and knowing, first among sailors and those who frequented the waterfront taverns and brothels. Many blamed it on our African and Indian ventures, but soon the connection to the Spanish discoveries across the Atlantic became widely accepted. The Portuguese response to the epidemic has been influenced by the nation's trading empire and historical circumstances. As a seafaring power with colonial outposts, Portugal has greater exposure to diverse diseases, but also access to potential remedies from around the world. The Reconquista, the centuries long Christian reconquest of the Iberian Peninsula from Islamic rule, only concluded in 1492, leaving behind a multicultural medical tradition incorporating European, Islamic and Jewish knowledge. Through Senhora Cardoso's connections, you meet Dr. João Rodrigues, a physician trained at the University of Coimbra, who has treated numerous cases of the disease among Lisbon's elite. He receives you in his consulting room, where shelves hold jars of medicinal substances from around the Portuguese Empire, herbs from Brazil, minerals from Africa, botanical preparations from India. What makes Portuguese medicine distinct is our global perspective, he explains. While physicians in Paris or London rely primarily on European and Mediterranean pharmacopoeia, we incorporate remedies from Africa, India, and now the Americas. This broader arsenal offers more options for treating novel diseases. Dr. Rodrigues describes Portugal's early adoption of guaiacum wood from the New World as a treatment. Our ships began bringing it directly from Brazil around 1498, earlier than most European nations received it. This gave us considerable experience with its effects. It seems to provide relief for many patients, particularly for the bone pains and skin lesions, though it rarely affects a complete cure. More interesting is his integration of traditional remedies from Africa and India into treatment protocols. From our West African territories, we've obtained herbs that indigenous healers use for similar symptoms. From India, compounds based on herbs like turmeric and neem show promise in reducing inflammation. We don't fully understand how these work, but careful observation confirms beneficial effects in many cases. This pragmatic, globally informed approach represents the cutting edge of Renaissance medicine, willing to experiment with diverse traditions while beginning to apply systematic observation to evaluate outcomes. The Portuguese Maritime Empire, bringing together medical knowledge from 4 continents, creates unique conditions for such innovation. You inquire about the disease's prevalence and perception in Portugal. Dr. Rodrigues sighs. It remains widespread, affecting all social classes. Initially, there was much stigma and blaming of foreigners, Africans, Jews, Spanish sailors, but as respected figures, even members of noble families developed symptoms, public discourse became more measured. He continues, our proximity to Spain, where the connection to Columbus's voyages was first proposed, meant its early acceptance here. Whether accurate or not, it shifted blame to distant shores rather than local scapegoats, which perhaps reduced some social strife. During your time in Lisbon, you observed both similarities and differences in how various social groups experience the epidemic compared to other European nations. The nobility and wealthy merchants, as elsewhere, receive private treatment and can afford expensive imported remedies. What's distinctive is their early access to New World treatments like guaiacum and sarsaparilla through Portugal's direct trading connections. The urban middle classes, guild members, government officials, prosperous shopkeepers follow medical advice similar to their counterparts in Northern Europe: moderate living, improved hygiene, cautious intimacy. Their treatment options include both traditional European remedies and more affordable versions of exotic imports. For the working poor and sailors, Lisbon offers several hospitals, founded during previous century plague epidemics, now adapted to treat the new disease. The largest, All Saints Royal Hospital, established by King Joe Feo II in 1492, has wards specifically for those with the French disease. Treatment focuses on basic care, diet management, and affordable herbal remedies, rather than expensive mercury or imported substances. Most distinctive is Lisbon's substantial population of African slaves and free black residents, brought from Portuguese colonies in West Africa, Congo, and Angola. Their experience of the epidemic reveals the intersection of disease with racial hierarchy and colonialism. When afflicted, enslaved individuals receive only basic treatment, determined by their economic value to owners, rather than medical need. Free black residents face discrimination at hospitals and from practitioners, despite officially equal access to care. After 2 weeks in Lisbon, you decide to continue to Seville, the heart of Spain's American enterprise, and the city most directly connected to Columbus and his voyages. The overland journey takes you through Portugal's eastern provinces, and into the Spanish region of Andalusia, a landscape of olive groves, vineyards, and fortified hill towns, bearing witness to centuries of frontier warfare between Christian and Islamic states. Seville's echoes of discovery, you travel with a merchant caravan, the safest option for crossing this sometimes lawless borderland. Your companions include Portuguese traders carrying Asian spices to eager Spanish markets, an Italian diplomat bound for the Spanish court, and several academics travelling to Seville's prestigious university. Around evening fires, conversation inevitably turns to the great transformations of the age, geographic discoveries, religious tensions, and the mysterious disease that has shadowed these developments. Columbus opened a new world to us, argues a young Spanish scholar, his voice thoughtful, but perhaps unleashed forces we scarcely comprehend, new lands, new peoples, new wealth, and new afflictions. God's design in this remains obscure, The timing alone establishes the connection, adds a physician from Coimbra. The disease appeared in Barcelona within months of Columbus's return. His sailors visited brothels upon landing, and soon the first cases emerged precisely in those districts. The Italian diplomat offers a different perspective, his voice measured. Yet, excavations in my country have uncovered skeletons showing signs of the disease from well before Columbus sailed. Perhaps it existed in both worlds and only now has found conditions to flourish. These debates, often heated, yet informed by growing empirical evidence, exemplify the intellectual ferment of the early 16th century. Traditional authorities and explanations face challenges from new observations and experiences. The epidemic itself, defying classical medical categories, accelerates this questioning of inherited knowledge. You reach Seville as summer heat intensifies, the mighty Guadalquivir River providing welcome relief for the city. Seville in 1502 stands at the centre of Spain's American enterprise. All ships to and from the newly claimed territories must pass through its port, and the Casa de Contratasi Finan House of Trade, established here that very year, administers the emerging colonial system. The city hums with activity related to the American ventures. Shipyards construct vessels for Atlantic crossings. Warehouses store goods bound for colonies and treasures returned from them. Officials process documentation for passengers and cargo. Adventurers seek backers for expeditions. Indigenous people brought back by explorers often forcibly draw curious crowds. Through a letter of introduction provided by Dr. Rodriguez in Lisbon, you gain access to Dr. Francisco L. Fapez de Villalobos, physician to the Spanish royal court and author of the first detailed medical treatise on the disease, published in Spain. You meet him at the university, where he occasionally lectures despite his primary duties to the monarchy. I titled my work, "On the Contagious and Accursed Disease of the French," he tells you with a wry smile, following the custom of naming it after one's traditional enemies. But I believe we Spaniards must accept some responsibility for its presence in Europe, if indeed it came from Hispaniola with Columbus's men. Dr. Villalobos represents the finest medical thinking of Renaissance Spain, combining traditional Galenic training with humanist learning and practical observation. His treatise, published in 1498, provided the first comprehensive clinical description of the disease in Spanish, including detailed observations of its progression through distinct stages. What distinguishes this malady from those previously known, he explains, his voice thoughtful, is its pattern of remission and recurrence. The initial symptoms resolve without treatment, giving false hope of recovery. Then new and different manifestations appear weeks or months later. This pattern confounded our understanding until we began recording detailed case histories over extended periods. You inquire about treatments employed in Spain, where proximity to the source of guaiacum might provide advantages. Dr. Villalobos sighs. Guaiacum has indeed been our primary recourse, especially after mercury showed such dangerous effects. But while it alleviates symptoms for many patients, few experience complete recovery. Some physicians now combine approaches, moderate mercury treatments, alternating with guaiacum decoctions and dietary regimens. Most valuable is his perspective on Columbus's role in the epidemic. I have interviewed several physicians who treated Columbus's crew upon their return. They confirmed that some sailors developed symptoms consistent with the disease shortly after reaching Spain. Whether they contracted it in the Indies or carried it there from Spain remains debated. He continues, Columbus himself suffered from a painful progressive illness in his later years that some believe was the French disease, though others attribute it to gout or arthritis. He died 4 years ago, his great discovery having brought him more grief than glory in the end. During your time in Seville, you gain access to documents and persons connected directly to Columbus's voyages. At the Casa de Contratasi Finan, newly established archives contain logs, correspondence, and official reports from the earliest expeditions. Though carefully guarded as state secrets, Your connections with Dr. Villalobos allow limited access to these materials. The logs mention health problems among crew members during and after the voyages, though descriptions are often vague. More revealing are personal letters from participants seeking medical care after their return, describing symptoms clearly recognizable as the French disease. Whether they contracted it in the Americas or after returning to Spain's port cities remains unclear from these accounts. You also meet Rodrigo de Jerez, an elderly man who claims to have sailed on Columbus's first voyage. Now living in modest circumstances despite his historic role, he receives visitors occasionally to share his experiences for a few coins. Whether his tales are entirely truthful or embellished for effect, they provide a first-hand perspective on the expedition's aftermath. Many of my shipmates fell ill in the months after our return, he tells you, sipping the wine your fee has purchased. Some with fevers that passed quickly, others with persistent ailments, including the dreaded pox. I was fortunate to escape the worst, though aches visit my bones when weather changes. He describes primitive medical practices observed among indigenous Caribbean peoples, some of which were adopted by desperate European settlers. They used the bark and leaves of certain trees to make infusions for skin ailments. Some colonists found these more effective than our own remedies. Eventually, these treatments found their way back to Spain as the guaiacum wood, now sold at such high prices. As summer passes into autumn, you extend your stay in Spain, travelling to other cities, including Salamanca, with its famed university, and Barcelona, where Columbus was received by Ferdinand and Isabella upon his return. Through these journeys, you observe how the epidemic has become integrated into Spanish society. No longer a terrifying novelty, but an established feature of the medical and social landscape. A continent adapting by 1502, 7 years after the first major European outbreak, the disease has quietly transformed from an acute epidemic to a chronic endemic presence. The initial panic has slowly subsided, replaced by systematic adaptation. Medical protocols, though still largely ineffective, have become standardized, their practices now woven into the fabric of daily care. Social responses, from hospital wards to preventative regulations, have been quietly institutionalized, becoming part of the familiar routines of public life. Religious interpretations have evolved from seeing the disease as unprecedented divine punishment to incorporating it into existing frameworks of sin and redemption, a softening of initial harsher judgments. As winter approaches, you quietly prepare for your return journey. Having travelled through much of Western Europe, observing the epidemic's profound impact and the evolving human responses, your experiences in the Iberian Peninsula have provided crucial perspective on the disease's possible origins and earliest European manifestations, complementing observations from Italy, Germany, France, and England, weaving together a more complete understanding. Before departing, you visit the magnificent Seville Cathedral, where Columbus's son Diego will eventually be entombed, though Columbus himself will be buried in Valladolid, then moved multiple times in death as in life. The massive structure still under construction, after replacing a mosque demolished following the Christian reconquest, symbolizes the transformative era you've witnessed, a world simultaneously expanding through exploration and contracting through shared afflictions, its destiny forever altered. The journey home gives you ample time to quietly reflect on all you've observed about how societies respond to epidemic disease. Certain patterns, you realize, have emerged consistently across diverse cultures and systems. Initially, communities react with fear, seeking to identify causes and assign blame, usually to marginalized groups or external enemies. This scapegoating provides a fleeting psychological comfort, but often hinders effective response. As understanding slowly grows, practical adaptations develop, modified social behaviors, new public health measures, evolving treatment protocols. These evolve through quiet trial and error, gradually improving outcomes, even without a full theoretical understanding of disease mechanisms. social hierarchies you've noticed profoundly shape both vulnerability to disease and access to care. The privileged suffer less, not from biological immunity, but from superior resources, living conditions, and treatment options. The vulnerable suffer disproportionately, their afflictions often less visible in historical records. Religious and moral frameworks initially interpret new diseases as divine punishment, often for sexual transgression. Over time, these harsh judgments typically soften as respected community members are affected, and practical care becomes more organized and compassionate. Medical understanding. You've witnessed advances through empirical observation, gently challenging traditional authorities. Epidemic diseases that defy classical explanations accelerate this process, pushing practitioners toward evidence-based approaches. Throughout, human resilience manifests in countless adaptations. Communities supporting afflicted members, practitioners developing new treatments, individuals modifying behaviors to reduce risk while maintaining necessary activities. As your ship sails homeward with the changing seasons, you ponder how these patterns might repeat with future epidemics, perhaps centuries hence. New diseases will emerge to challenge human understanding and institutions. Will societies respond with greater wisdom, having learned from experiences like the French disease, or will they repeat cycles of fear, blame, and stumbling adaptation before finding truly effective responses? You know now that the disease, labelled variously as French, Neapolitan, Spanish, or simply the Great Pox, will continue its devastating course for centuries to come. Not until 1905 will the causative organism, Treponema pallidum, be quietly identified. Not until the 1940s will effective antibiotic treatment become available. Countless lives will be affected in the intervening centuries. Some ended prematurely, others lived in quiet suffering, still others shaped by caring for the afflicted or developing treatments. The debate over the disease's origins will continue as well. Archaeological evidence from both Europe and the Americas complicates the Columbus connection, suggesting more complex patterns of development and transmission than simple importation from one continent to another. The mutation of related treponemal diseases from non-venereal to venereal forms may have occurred independently in multiple locations as social conditions changed. What remains clear from both historical accounts and modern understanding is how profoundly epidemic diseases shape human societies, not just through direct suffering and death, but through transformed social relations, institutional responses, medical developments, and cultural expressions. The French disease permanently altered European perspectives on sexuality, approaches to public health, the development of hospitals, and countless other social dimensions. As your journey concludes, you carry this deeper understanding of how humans and diseases co-evolve, each shaping the other through complex interactions. The syphilis epidemic of Renaissance Europe, for all its suffering, contributed to medical advances in development and social adaptations that would eventually reduce its impact. This pattern, crisis driving innovation, suffering spurring response, offers perhaps the most hopeful perspective on humanity's ongoing struggle with infectious disease. The story of any epidemic is ultimately the story of human vulnerability and resilience. Our bodies susceptible to invisible organisms, our societies capable of remarkable adaptation. From the French disease of 1495 to modern outbreaks, this fundamental dynamic remains constant. We are simultaneously fragile biological beings and creators of knowledge and institutions that expand our collective capacity to survive and thrive. Despite that fragility, this tension between human vulnerability and human ingenuity continues to define our relationship with disease. As we face new epidemics, we draw on accumulated knowledge and institutional memory from past crises, yet often repeat historical patterns of initial denial, scapegoating, and unequal impact before developing effective responses. Understanding this history doesn't prevent all future suffering. but it does illuminate paths toward more rapid and equitable adaptation. And so, as you finally return home, changed by all you've witnessed across epidemic-stricken Europe, you carry both sobering knowledge of human suffering and inspiring examples of human resilience. The French disease, like all great epidemics, reveals both the worst and best of humanity, our capacity for fear, blame, and cruelty, alongside our capacity for care, adaptation, and healing. This complex legacy continues to shape our world today, visible to those who know where to look for its lingering influences. Now let these quiet echoes of history gently guide you into a peaceful night's rest. Sweet dreams, dear traveller, and sleep well.